Page 196, Chapter 23, The Decision. As it turned out, Ned had been so frightened that Bill would kill me and he'd be haunted by my ghost, he'd run and found Thumbless Jake and told him the whole story. "He got a good shaking from me, I'll tell you," said Jake after he'd helped me down the rickety steps. "Where are we?" I asked, rubbing my hands where the rope had been. "Down in the Borough," Jake answered. "Somewhere near Lant Street." "Lant Street?" I exclaimed. "We were probably 2 miles from Broad Street. What time is it?" I could tell from the shadows on the street that it was early evening already. I'd slept a lot longer than I thought. Lucky for me, Fisheye and Kate had gotten delayed somewhere, doing some sort of criminal activity. Or, just as likely, they'd gotten drunk in a pub and lost track of the hours. But if it was late, that meant I didn't have much time to get to the committee meeting, which would begin at 7 o'clock. As if in answer, Jake's stomach rumbled. "Time? It's time for my tea," he grinned. "I should think it's after 6. Not, mind you, that I pay much attention to hours these days. I mostly just flow with the tides." After 6? We began walking toward Borough Road. From there, I figured I could make my way to Waterloo Bridge and then north to Soho. All at once, a woman rushed up to me and grabbed my arm. I yelled and pulled away, thinking it was Kate. "It is you!" the woman exclaimed. A small girl came running up behind her. "It's him, Betsy! It's the boy from Broad Street!" "Betsy!" I cried. Betsy threw her arms around me. "Eel, you came, just like you said you would. But where's Dilly?" I couldn't answer because suddenly Betsy's aunt was grabbing my hands and talking at great speed into my face. "Oh, I am glad to see you, dear lad. You must think me a perfect witch after how I acted the other day. I've always been this way, flying off at the handle and saying things I don't mean. Just the opposite of my dear brother, who was as mellow as an old mare. I'm right sorry." She pulled Betsy close to her. "Perhaps it was the grief and shock that got hold of me. Betsy is a dear girl, and my husband and I are lucky to have her." I was happy for Betsy's sake, but time was short. Fish-Eye Bill could appear at any minute, and I had to get over the river and all the way to Soho soon. Very soon. And then I had an inspiration. "Ma'am, I believe you mentioned that your husband kept a cab," I said urgently. "By any chance, would your husband and his horse be home now?" Betsy's aunt had just opened her mouth to answer when something fast and strong slammed into me and knocked me down, making wild grunting noises. Chaos erupted. "Now, what's this?" I heard Jake say. "You did bring Dilly!" cried Betsy, clapping her hands. "You brought her after all!" It was quite late Thursday evening by the time I got to Berwick Street, eager to tell Florrie the whole incredible story, and the most incredible thing of all was that she was alive to hear it. Florrie was lying in a small bed. I pulled up a chair beside her. I'd never been to the Baker's rooms before. Florrie shared one with her sister, Nancy, a special luxury for our neighborhood. On the walls around her bed hung sketches she had done. I recognized our friends and neighbors. Annie Ribbons holding a sewing basket that overflowed with thread, bits of lace, and streams of ribbons. Mrs. Lewis with baby Fanny in her arms. Mr. Griggs cutting cloth for a new jacket. And there were Betsy and Bernie, who was throwing a stick for Dilly, all three of them smiling. There was even a picture of me and my mudlark bag, with little Queenie's head poking out. Florrie's father had let me in and warned that I couldn't stay long. "She's holding her own and resting comfortable like," he told me. "But don't tire her out, lad. I've lost my wife, and I can't bear the thought of losing my dear girl, too." "She's strong, Mr. Baker," I told him. "She'll make it." Florrie's face was as white as paper, but her skin didn't have that awful blue tinge I'd seen on Mr. Griggs and Bernie. That gave me real hope. "Hello, Eel. Sorry I missed you yesterday. she said weakly, holding out her hand to me. I missed a lot this week. Once Mum took sick." Her voice trailed off and she began to cry. "I'm so sorry, Florrie." I squeezed her hand gently. After a while, Florrie said, It's Thursday, ain't it? You know, all the time I was sick, I kept thinking that even if I died, you'd be helping Dr. Snow." Her eyes looked enormous in her thin face. "And did you, Eel? Did you and Dr. Snow solve the mystery?" "We did, but it's a long story. It starts even before I knew you," I said. "Tell me everything." I told Florrie about meeting Gus on her doorstep and how he'd given me the clue to the unexpected case. I told her about going to Hampstead with Dilly to track down the story of the widow Ely. I explained about Islington, too, and how Mrs. Ely's niece had been the only case of cholera in her neighborhood. Then I let on about Henry and how I'd been keeping him secret all these months, and that led to telling Florrie how Fish-Eye Bill Tyler had snatched me and how everything seemed lost until Thumbless Jake rescued me. Finally, I got to the part where we'd met Betsy and her aunt near Lant Street and how Mr. Griggs had been right all along about Dilly. She did have a good sense of direction. "What happened then?" Florrie wanted to know. "What about tonight? Tell me." And so I did. We had all piled into the cab together. Me and Betsy and Dilly, Thumbless Jake, and even Betsy's aunt, whose name turned out to be Mrs. Edith Flanders. The cab rocked so hard that Dilly got scared and began whining and trying to sit on my lap. Her nails scraped my legs. Betsy giggled, which set off Thumbless Jake, who made a great huffing sound. I'd never heard him laugh before. Mr. Flanders, the cabby, was known as Figgy. Leastwise, that's what Betsy's aunt called him. He drove his horse wildly across Waterloo Bridge. Betsy's aunt kept hollering out the cab window, "Faster, Figgy! You can do it!" This last part made Florrie's eyes sparkle. "Somehow, we arrived without tipping over," I said. "Dr. Snow was standing in front of a table with several men sitting there. That was the Board of Governors. I didn't know any of 'em from the neighborhood, but they sure seemed old and dignified, with white hair and whiskers and solemn expressions." First thing I heard when I came in was Dr. Snow talking in that strange, husky voice he has. He had our map out, and I expect he was going on about the mode of communication of cholera, and such like. I explained how we'd added a little mark on the map for each person who died, and how it was clear that those marks were all clustered around the Broad Street pump, and how this showed that the water, not the air, was the cause of the disease. Did they believe him, Eel?" Florrie whispered. I shook my head. "No, they did not. I could tell from their questions they weren't convinced. Leastwise, not convinced enough to cause disruption to the neighborhood by taking away one of the folks' favorite sources of water." "So what did you do?" "I was in the doorway, on account of I'd leapt from the cab and come in first, and I was just listening quietly when suddenly everyone else burst in behind me. Betsy and her uncle and aunt, and Dilly, and Thumbless Jake from the river." I laughed at the memory of it and held my nose. You can imagine that Jake sure got everyone's attention. Every head turned to look at us. "What's the meaning of this?" demanded the gentleman in charge. I could tell that Dr. Snow was too shocked to say a word, and so was Reverend Whitehead, who was there too. So it was up to me, I told Florrie. Dilly and I strode right up to stand beside Dr. Snow. "I'm Dr. Snow's assistant," I announced. "I'm called Eel. And Piccadilly, that's my dog here, she and I have tracked down an unexpected case that will prove Dr. Snow's theory. And if you will bear with me, sirs, I believe we can convince you to take the handle off the Broad Street pump so no more people get sick." "My goodness, you must have sounded like a gentleman's son." Florrie clapped her hands in delight. What did they say then? You could have heard a pin drop. It was that quiet. One of the men on the committee turned to Dr. Snow and said, very gruff and annoyed, Dr. Snow, is what this urchin says true? Are you making a mockery of our proceedings? No, sir, not at all. I suggest we listen to this boy's report, Dr. Snow replied, all calm. I, for one, am eager to hear it. So I told them how I'd learned yesterday morning that a widow from Hampstead named Susanna Ely had been getting water from the Broad Street pump every day. A boy named Gus from the Ely Brothers factory would take it to her in a little cart several times a week, I testified. I myself witnessed him drawing that water on the morning of Monday, August 28th, from the Broad Street pump. That's right, exclaimed Florrie. We were there, weren't we? It was the day you found Queenie. Yes, and so when I saw Gus on your doorstep yesterday, I remembered that. And then he told me the woman had died last Saturday from the cholera, I explained. Go on. What happened then? I laughed. Well, at that point, Thumbless Jake starts making a ruckus in the back of the room, jabbing Betsy's uncle in the ribs. Will you listen to that boy, he boomed. Used to be a mudlark, he did. But I helped give him a new start in life, and now he sounds as grand as a doctor himself. Florrie was laughing so hard, tears streamed down her cheeks. Go on. By this time, the committee chair was red in the face. He jumps up, yelling, Order! Order in the meeting, please! But then Dr. Snow starts talking too, all excited because he's so eager to hear about the unexpected case I found. Please, gentlemen, let the boy speak. And he motions for me to keep talking. I paused to take a breath. Here, Florrie, I'll pretend I'm giving the speech all over again. I stood up and gave a little bow. This is what I said. I'm sorry for the interruption, sir, but when I heard about the widow Ely, I decided to investigate for myself. I walked to Hampstead with Dilly here, and I found out that Susanna Ely had indeed died from cholera after drinking the water Gus brought her from the Broad Street pump. Not only that, she was the only death from cholera in the neighborhood, which I think Dr. Snow will be able to confirm with the General Register's office. I stopped to take a breath. Florrie nodded for me to keep talking. And that's not all. I found out from a servant in Mrs. Ely's house that her niece had been visiting and had also drank the water. So after leaving Hampstead, I walked to the neighborhood of Islington. I found the niece's house and confirmed that, once again, this death from cholera was the only one in the neighborhood. I believe, sirs, that this evidence supports Dr. Snow's theory that cholera is spread by water. In this case, water from the Broad Street pump. And I hope you will agree to his request to remove the handle to protect the people of Golden Square, so that no more of my friends and neighbors will die. I stopped, out of breath, just as I had been at the meeting. I never made such a long speech before in my life, Florrie. I tell you that by the time I was done, my legs were shaking. It was a good thing Dr. Snow came over and put his arm around my shoulders, or else I might have collapsed right there. And did they believe you? Florrie asked. Are they going to take the handle off? It'll happen tomorrow morning at 10, I told her. If you're better, Danny and I will carry you down the street to see it happen. And before you know it, you'll be sitting in the sun, eating hard-boiled eggs. Mrs. Gaskell has a new novel called North and South, which will come out a bit at a time in the Household Words magazine. I hear it's got a girl heroine in it, someone brave like you. We can read it together. I'm not brave at all. I'm still awful scared, Florrie admitted. You're going to make it, I promised her. Tell me you believe it. I do. I believe we'll soon be sitting in the sunshine, reading and eating hard-boiled eggs. Florrie's father came to the doorway and cleared his throat. It's time, son. Let her rest. I'll come back in the morning. I'll be here waiting. And then I leaned over and touched her forehead with a kiss. A little bit of romance going on, maybe. There we go. Okay, so lots been happening in the story. A couple more chapters to go.